Part 33. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 321. Oyu Zonghao looked very calm and not afraid at all, which surprised Chen Tao. Oyu Zonghao's smile slowly faded. He looked at the sofa where Chen Tao was sitting. He looked at Chen Tao and said, "Afraid? Why am I afraid? If you want to kill me, then you will definitely not talk nonsense with me." Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao and said, "If you don't want me to die, then if you sneak in here, there is only one possibility: you want my property. Since you want my property, this matter will be easy to handle." Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao playfully and said, "I spend a lot of time hiding in my safe, and my safe is guarded by someone. It will definitely arouse others' suspicion in the past. If you are willing to be more cautious, I can give you the remaining time I have. You only need to leave me an hour. I will cooperate with you without struggling or shouting." "How is it?" Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao. "So that's it?" Chen Tao looked at Oyu Zonghao and said, "You misunderstood. It turned out that this guy thought Chen Tao was here to rob the house." Oyu Zonghao indeed misunderstood. Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao, misunderstanding. Chen Tao said, "Yes, I'm not here for your property. I'm here to take your life. But before I take your life, I want to see what else you have to say." Oyu Zonghao's pupils condensed slightly, there was cold sweat on his forehead, his eyebrows wrinkled slightly. He looked at Chen Tao and said, Why do you want to kill me? If you want to kill me, you have to give me a reason." Chen Tao looked at Oyu Zonghao and said, "As the ruler of this civilization, you set those rules. You asked everyone to hand over their time to you, forcing people to kill each other. I think you deserve to die." Oyu Zonghao frowned and said, "You want to kill me because of this? Then, you haven't thought about another point." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Oyu Zonghao. Oyu Zonghao said, "What do you think of this underground city?" Chen Tao didn't expect Oyu Zonghao to mention this. He looked at Oyu Zonghao and said, "Underground city, what's wrong?" Oyu Zonghao said, "This underground city appeared to protect human beings. On this planet, above the ground, terrifying winds will appear every once in a while. Any building that exists on the surface will face those fierce winds, must be destroyed. Every time a strong wind appears, it will take away most people's lives. It can be said without exaggeration." Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao and said, "This underground city protects the lives of all humans, but do you know what is needed to run this underground city? If you want this underground city to operate, you need workers. Who will pay them the wages of the workers? I am not a businessman." Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao and said, "And even if I am a businessman, I will not waste the time I earn on running this underground city. If I want this underground city to run, then everyone's help is needed. People give me their time, and I give my time to those who work to keep this underground city running." Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Even if I don't do this, someone will do it. If no one does it, then the people living here will only die." After hearing Oyu Zonghao's words, Chen Tao felt an idea flash in his head. He found that he had subconsciously forgotten a fact. Time. Before a person has the second generation of genes, his time will not increase, but will only decrease. Time will only be used less and less, and that is something that cannot be produced. So in a human society, who will give time to others? Oyu Zonghao leaned on the back of the sofa, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "If you want to kill me because of this, then I think you should change your mind." Chen Tao looked at Oyu Zonghao and said, "Are you sure you didn't use this time to line your own pockets? Do you do something to benefit yourself?" Oyu Zonghao smiled, "Of course there is such a thing. I believe that when you are in my position, of course you should enjoy it." "Haha, what a treat!" a voice came from the side. Chen Tao and Oyu Zonghao looked at Betty next to them. Betty sat lazily on the sofa, with her little hands folded around her chest, looking at Oyu Zonghao and saying, "The operation of your underground city only requires the people in this underground city. Obviously, if everyone takes 10 days, you can maintain the underground city, the operation of the city. But you tripled it? As far as I know, you used the extra 2 times for enjoyment." The smile on Oyu Zonghao's face slowly faded, and he narrowed his eyes. Betty looked at Oyu Zonghao and said, "So, do you have any explanation for this matter?" Oyu Zonghao adjusted his mood, showed a smile, and said, "Haha, it's very interesting. Indeed, you are right, I did do this. But, I think on this planet, anyone else would do this. Those people are just stupid guys. Let's take their time." Oyu Zonghao crossed his arms and said, "The weak should be eliminated, and the strong should have more time." Oyu Zonghao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Isn't this the law of nature? After all, this guy used his power to force those people to do inhumane things." Chen Tao stood up slowly and said, "Yes, I agree with you." The corners of Oyu Zonghao's mouth rose slightly. Chen Tao looked at Chen Tao and said, "The weak should obey the management of the strong." Betty was slightly startled, and she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao actually said such a thing. Although Betty didn't dislike it, Chen Tao's words were not in line with his usual character, so Betty was a little surprised. Oyu Zonghao smiled and said, "That's right." Chen Tao looked at Oyu Zonghao and said lightly, "So, now I am the strong one, and you are the weak one. I want you to die. I believe you won't have any objections, right?" Oyu Zonghao's smile froze. Chen Tao raised his hand towards Oyu Zonghao. Oyu Zonghao's face turned pale. What do you want to do?" Chen Tao waved his hand. Oyu Zonghao's body began to dissipate. Oyu Zonghao was slightly startled. He looked down and saw that his hand slowly turned into sand. The sofa slowly dissipated. Oyu Zonghao's body was like a pile of weathered sand, dissipating. No trace left. Oyu Zonghao was right. The world needs a manager, but that person must not be someone like Oyu Zonghao who treats others as ants. Yasha's eyes trembled slightly, and there was a hint of disbelief on her face. Betty looked at the place where Oyu Zonghao disappeared, and she looked at Chen Tao. "What are your plans next?" "My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 322. Chen Tao said, "Change the manager." When Betty heard this, she looked at Chen Tao and said, "Would you like another one?" Betty thought for a moment and said, "Actually, I don't think it's a good idea for you to do this." "Not good?" Chen Tao looked at Betty. Betty said, "Yes, the development of civilization should be left to the civilization itself. If you control the civilization here with the ideas of your civilization, then this civilization will not be called Lifeng civilization, but Earth Star civilization. And for people in this civilization, the ideas and civilization you bring are completely different from them. From their perspective, you may be wrong." Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "I don't care about that. Instead of letting the civilization evolve into an evil civilization and destroy it, it is better to modify the civilization and let my thoughts and civilization affect it." Just like what Oyu Zonghao said, Chen Tao said, "The weak should be dominated by the strong." When will the people of this civilization leave the strong and no longer rely on this planet? Then let them leave my world, rule it. Betty looked at Chen Tao and said, "What you are doing now is more like Rose's approach than the king of the dragon civilization. You are destroying the balance of the universe now." Upon hearing this, Chen Tao frowned and said, "I am saving them and reshaping their minds in order to protect the balance of the universe." Betty blinked and said, "From a general perspective, what you are doing is protecting the balance of the universe." Betty sat on the sofa, swaying her little feet and said, "Forget it, I don't care about this, it depends on what you do." Chen Tao didn't want to think too much and raised his hand. A blue light point appears. An artificial human was programmed by Chen Tao and stood in this hall. This artificial man clearly looks like Oyu Zonghao. But this artificial man is not Oyu Zonghao. The pupils of the artificial man had a hint of luster. He looked at Chen Tao, saluted to Chen Tao, and said respectfully, "Number 101, I have met the master." Hearing this, Chen Tao said calmly, "Number 101, you will be responsible for the management of the civilization from now on. Manage this planet according to the way of the Earth and Star civilization. As for the additional operating problems of the underground world, you will use your time to deal with them. Artificial humans have unlimited time, and can use this unlimited time to easily solve problems caused by lack of time." Number 101 said, "Yes. Well, in this case, the matter can be considered settled." Betty crossed her arms and said, "However, you still have one thing to deal with." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Betty. Betty turned her face and looked to the side. Chen Tao looked along Betty's line of sight, and he saw a girl standing aside, wearing thin clothes and shivering. Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly when he saw the girl in front of him. "I didn't pay attention to it just now, but now that I saw it, Chen Tao realized that she was a beautiful woman. She was wearing a thin gauze skirt, which was thin on her body and tied with a belt around her waist. The hem of the skirt is very short, and the legs are slender and straight, about 1 meter long by visual inspection, strong and delicate. Her skin is as white as cream. She has silver hair, like a silver waterfall, hanging naturally behind her. Under the bangs, there is a beautiful face. She has long and narrow eyelashes, big eyes, and a high bridge of nose with thin red lips. There was a hint of charm in her eyes." She noticed that Chen Tao was looking at her, and she looked a little scared. Her timid look made people feel pity for her. "This is a naturally charming beauty." Chen Tao said, "Who are you?" Yasha hurriedly spoke up and said, "Sir, I am Yasha, and I was brought here by him. I have never done anything bad." She looked at Chen Tao nervously, looking a little uneasy. Seeing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "Don't worry, I won't kill you." "Won't you kill?" Betty said. "If you don't kill, if she goes outside and talks nonsense and tells you about killing Oyu Zonghao, your plan will be ruined." "No. I won't say it," Yasha said nervously. "I have nothing to do with him. I was forcibly bought by him. He is my enemy. If he dies, then I was saved by you. I will not retaliate with kindness." Chen Tao crossed his arms, looked at Yasha, and said, "Don't worry, I said I won't kill you, so I won't kill you." Yasha breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Thank you, sir." She bowed lightly. Chen Tao stepped closer to Yasha. Noticing Chen Tao's approach, Yasha's heart froze slightly. She looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. There was a hint of uneasiness on her little face, and she slowly lowered her head. Looking at Yasha's expression, Chen Tao said, "Did I just scare you?" Yasha was startled, and she raised her face to look at Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked into Yasha's eyes and smiled. Looking at Chen Tao's gentle smile, Yasha's heart beat slightly faster, a blush appeared on her face, and she lowered her head slightly. Chen Tao raised his hand and held Yasha's hand. Feeling the warmth from the man's big hand, Yasha's heart was in confusion. This man is completely different from the hateful Oyu Zonghao. He is very powerful and handsome. And if he killed Oyu Zonghao, it would be equivalent to saving her. No matter where you are, heroes saving beauties will never go out of style. After being rescued, Yasha was a little afraid of him, but after being rescued, she also felt that kind of gratitude. Being shaken by Chen Tao's big hand, Yasha was confused. Chen Tao didn't think much about other things, just meeting was fate. He just wanted to see the time on Yasha's wrist. On Yasha's wrist, it was shown that there was only 1 day left. Seeing this day, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He raised his hand and put it on Yasha's wrist. Yasha was slightly startled. She raised her face to look at Chen Tao. Chen Tao saw Yasha looking at him. He smiled and said, "I'll give you a gift." Yasha was slightly stunned. She looked down and saw that the time on her wrist was increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a while, Yasha's pupils condensed slightly. 100 years. Chen Tao retracted his hand. Yasha looked at the time on her wrist. She hurriedly looked at Chen Tao and said, "My lord, this time is too much, Yasha dare not take it." She looked at Chen Tao nervously. "Please take back the time, Yasha can't take it." Yasha's reaction made Chen Tao stunned. According to what Valia said before, most people in this world are evil. Logically, Yasha should be that kind of person, and she should be surprised to get so much time. But Chen Tao never expected that Yasha would react like this. Chen Tao thought about it. Yes, there are always people with different ideas. Most people here are evil, but where there is evil, there is good. There may be few people with good intentions, but there are definitely some. In other words, Yasha is obviously such a person. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 323. Chen Tao said, "There is nothing you can't ask for. If I give it to you, just keep it." He looked at Yasha, who was a little uneasy. Chen Tao looked at her, his eyebrows slightly stretched, and said, "If you are not asked to do anything and your time is wasted, you are a little uneasy. Then I might as well give you a job, okay?" "Work?" Yasha looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Work." He said, "As you can see, the man next to me is an artificial man programmed by me. Although he looks like the Ouzonghao you know, he is actually just a robot. The robot is making judgments. It's different from other people, and I might do something wrong. What I want is for you to keep an eye on it. If you think something is wrong, you can contact me." With that said, Chen Tao took out a necklace and handed it to her. Yasha blinked, raised her hand and took it. Chen Tao said, "You just need to hold this necklace with your hand and say my name silently, Chen Tao. I can feel it." He looked at Yasha and said, "Is that okay?" Yasha blinked. She hesitated for a moment. Frankly speaking, after being rescued, Yasha wanted to return to her relatives. But Yasha glanced at the 100 years on her wrist. Yasha looked at Chen Tao and nodded, "Okay." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Okay, that matter has been dealt with. It's time for me to go back." Yasha was startled, and she quickly said, "That." Chen Tao looked at Yasha. Yasha hesitated, but she still said, "He is a robot, so if he pretends to be Ouzonghao, will his secret be exposed? It's too easy to let a robot pretend to be a person." Yasha was a little worried. If something went wrong with the robot, she would be in trouble too. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "Don't worry, I have asked him to read Ouzonghao's database, that is to say, the memory as the saying goes. He can imitate Ouzonghao's every move based on Ouzonghao's memory, so you can don't worry, the secret won't be revealed." Yasha breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Then I'll be relieved." Yet Chen Tao looked at Betty. Betty met Chen Tao's gaze, and her eyebrows stretched slightly. Chen Tao said, "Let's go." Betty hummed, "I also plan to go back to eat steak." Chen Tao smiled slightly. The two disappeared together. Looking at the place where Chen Tao and Betty disappeared, Yasha's eyes trembled slightly, her mouth opened slightly, her eyes full of surprise. Incredible, this scene is too incredible for Yasha. This is an area that Yasha cannot understand. The two big living people just disappeared out of thin air. For Yasha, it was completely incomprehensible. Yasha slowly adjusted her thoughts, and her eyes fell on number 101 beside her. Seeing this artificial man who looked exactly like Oyu Zonghao, Yasha couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Is this guy really just an android? Or is it that everything that just happened was just her dreaming? After the android looked at the direction Chen Tao and Betty were leaving, he looked at Yasha. He showed a gentle smile and said, "Miss Yasha, if I made any mistakes, please tell me." Yasha was slightly startled when she saw the gentle words spoken by the man who looked exactly like Oyu Zonghao. She nodded slightly and said, "Okay, okay." She still couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Other side. Chen Tao and Betty returned to the bedroom of base number 1. Betty put away her dragon wings and horns, and walked out the door with small steps. Looking at Betty's back, Chen Tao said, "Baby, where are you going?" Betty was slightly startled. She turned back to look at Chen Tao and said, "Of course we're going to have lunch. Are you coming?" Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "I'm not going, I have something else to do." Betty rolled her eyes at Chen Tao and said, "Yeah." She walked out the door and left. Watching Betty's small figure disappear from sight, Chen Tao crossed his chest with his hands and sat on the edge of the bed. He thought for a moment and then contacted someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time. Lena. He contacted Lin Na through the genetic channel. "Master," Lin Na's voice had a hint of surprise, "Master, why do you have time to contact me? I haven't contacted Lin Na for a long time." Hearing Lin Na's voice, Chen Tao said, "I have something to ask you." Perhaps because she heard the seriousness in Chen Tao's voice, Lin Na calmed down and said, "Master, if you need anything, just ask." Chen Tao said, "Hong Tao organizes and manages the entire Earth star. So I want to know one thing. The more time is used, the less time is used. So as the manager of the Hong Tao Organization Association, how do you solve this problem?" This is a problem that Chen Tao has always ignored. Time will only become less and less used up until it disappears. You know, even a baby only has 1 hour to survive after birth. If you want the baby to survive, you can only rely on the parents to use their own time to keep the baby alive. In other words, the time of the entire human society will decrease infinitely until it disappears. But on this planet, this problem has never arisen. Everyone can receive time as wages as long as they work hard. This is very strange. This question. Lin Na said, "Time does not decrease as time is used." Other sources. Will time increase? Lin Na said, "Wild creatures carry time. There are time processing plants that can convert the time possessed by wild creatures into time used by humans. Black Swan has always had such a time processing plant. After the demise of Black Swan, Hong Tao Organization took over the time processing plant. At present, the time of the entire civilization is maintained by the time processing plant," Lin Na said, "but, with the increase in population, it is becoming more and more difficult to maintain it. I think that after a certain period of time, it will not be able to continue to maintain it, and we can only give up part of our lives." Hearing this, Chen Tao suddenly realized. Chen Tao has never considered other sources of time. Now he understood that this is the case. Chen Tao said, "Come to my place." "Well, okay, master." Although Lin Na was confused, she still responded. Locate Lin Na's position and open a micro wormhole. A micro wormhole appeared in front of Chen Tao. Chen Tao slowly sat on the edge of the bed and said to Lin Na through the gene channel, "You should be able to see a dark wormhole in front of you. Walk in and you will be able to come directly to me. Go in." Lin Na hesitated for a moment and said, "Yes." As Lin Na's voice fell, Chen Tao saw a beautiful figure emerge in front of the black wormhole. Seeing the beautiful figure in front of him, Chen Tao was slightly stunned. "My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 324. Lin Na stood in front of Chen Tao wrapped in a thin bath towel. Lin Na's hair was still a little wet, and it looked like she had just finished a bath. The bath towel was attached to her mature figure, and her waist was held, and her strong legs were slender and straight. Her skin was fair and delicate. Her hair seemed to be cut short for convenience, revealing a fair and slender neck. She had a delicate oval face, which looked delicate and moving. However, Chen Tao never expected that she would run over like this. From her appearance, it seemed that she had just finished a bath and only had time to put on a bath towel, and she didn't even wear shoes. When Lin Na saw Chen Tao, she saluted Chen Tao and said, "Master." Chen Tao said, "Don't be so polite, did you just finish a bath?" Lin Na blushed slightly and said, "I was just taking a bath." Chen Tao raised his hand, and there was an extra windbreaker in his hand, which he threw to Lin Na. Lin Na took it and looked at Chen Tao. "Thank you, master." Then she put on her clothes. Seeing this, Chen Tao said, "Don't thank me, actually, if you were taking a shower just now, you should have told me." Lin Na looked at Chen Tao and said, "Lin Na belongs to the master. She will appear whenever the master wants her to." Hearing this, Chen Tao touched the back of his head and said, "Forget it." He stood up, looked at Lin Na, and said, "I asked you to come here to upgrade your genome." Lin Na looked at Chen Tao with big eyes. "Genomics? What is that?" Chen Tao was slightly startled when he heard it. He touched the back of his head. Chen Tao thought Lin Na knew, but now it seems that Lin Na didn't know. Chen Tao and his lovers were on base number 1 during this period, and base number 1 was suspended in the air, and almost no one dared to touch it. Only Chen Tao and others knew the concept of genome, and other people on Earth didn't know these things. Even Lin Na, the leader of the Hongtao organization, which represents the ruling organization of Earth, didn't know. In other words, although Chen Tao already has powerful technology, his technology has actually had no impact on Earth. His technology has not been used on Earth, and Earth is still just a pre-nuclear civilization. Chen Tao said, "Genes refer to organisms composed of genes. Our human body is also a kind of genome, and what I want to do is to upgrade your genome." He looked at Lin Na and said, "In this way, you can get unlimited lifespan, and lifespan represents time, so you will have unlimited time. Using this time, you can solve the problem of insufficient time on Earth." Lin Na's eyes lit up slightly, and she looked at Chen Tao. "Is it really possible?" Chen Tao said, "Of course." Lin Na looked at Chen Tao. "What do I need to do?" Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "No, just like this." He raised his hand. "Enter the inner world mode." The surroundings turned into blue code. Chen Tao looked at Lin Na, who had also turned into a blue code. He raised his hand, and the blue code on Lin Na changed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It didn't take long. The genome upgrade was completed. Chen Tao exited the inner world mode. Chen Tao looked at Lin Na and said, "It's done." "It's done." Lin Na was stunned, and there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. For Chen Tao, he had already completed the upgrade for Lin Na, but for Lin Na, it was just a matter of a moment. Lin Na didn't know what was going on, but it was already done. Chen Tao said, "Look at your wrist." Lin Na obediently raised her wrist and looked at it. When Lin Na looked at it, her eyes were shining, and there was a hint of surprise on her face. On her wrist, there were originally dark green Arabic numerals, but now the Arabic numerals have disappeared, replaced by a symbol of infinity. Lin Na's eyes trembled slightly, and she raised her face to look at Chen Tao. Chen Tao crossed his arms, looked at her, and said, "Before, weren't you very confused about why I was invulnerable? Now you are invulnerable too." Lin Na was stunned for a moment. She looked at her wrist, and then looked at Chen Tao. "Is this all right?" Chen Tao nodded slightly. Okay, with this time, I think you should be able to deal with the things behind with peace of mind. Lin Na's eyes lit up slightly, she looked at Chen Tao, and then smiled. Thank you, Master. Well, Chen Tao said, I have seen the development of the Earth star during this period, and you have handled it well. This is a kind of reward. It's not good to call you out when you are taking a bath. Now that the problem is solved, you can go back. Chen Tao looked at the wormhole and said, you can go back to the bathroom from there. When Lin Na heard it, she looked at Chen Tao and said, yes. She turned and left. Clean and neat. Watching Lin Na's back disappear, Chen Tao retracted his sight, lying on the bed by himself, looking at the ceiling. During this period, Chen Tao had a very comfortable life, doing whatever he wanted. However, he was a little bored. Since the dragon people strengthened their super concept armor, I don't need to do anything when facing enemies from the outer universe. Chen Tao closed his eyes. Too idle. I guess I will get sick from being idle. Dear, suddenly, a voice came from the side. Chen Tao opened his eyes and looked around. Fang Xueqing was standing there gracefully, shaking her long tail and looking at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, he smiled and said, what's wrong? He raised his hand and stroked Fang Xueqing's long white hair. Fang Xueqing looked at Chen Tao and said, something happened to Li Xiaolu. Li Xiaolu. Chen Tao sat up, he frowned and said, what's the matter? Fang Xueqing slowly sat next to Chen Tao, her eyes were shining, and she said, I heard from He Yuxuan that Li Xiaolu seemed to be kidnapped. The person who kidnapped Li Xiaolu also called He Yuxuan with Li Xiaolu's mobile phone and asked for a ransom. Chen Tao frowned slightly. What's going on? You know, Chen Tao has already upgraded the genes of everyone around him. Although Li Xiaolu is not Chen Tao's woman, Chen Tao has already regarded her as his sister, so Chen Tao has also upgraded her genes. Li Xiaolu is now a third-generation gene, comparable to Katie at the beginning. Kidnapping. Li Xiaolu is indeed studying on Earth, but kidnapping a person with a third-level gene is incredible. Could it be? Chen Tao's mind flashed, and his face sank slightly. Could it be that someone from another universe attacked Li Xiaolu? My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 325. Nebula, check to see if there is any human genetic data from other universes near this planet besides Vera and Betty, Chen Tao said hurriedly. Nebula's mechanical voice came and slowly sounded, not detected. Isn't it? Not from the outer universe? In other words, the other party's technology is more powerful than Nebula, and even Nebula can't detect it. If that's the case, that's bad. Chen Tao's expression became more solemn. He quickly got out of bed and said, Xingyun, search for Li Xiaolu's location. Anyway, gotta check it out. Searching, search completed. Chen Tao said, open the picture of where she is. A picture appeared in front of Chen Tao. Chen Tao took a look. I found Li Xiaolu now in a strange living room. In this living room, Li Xiaolu was tied with a rope and seemed unable to move, lying on the sofa. The eyes and mouth were bound with thick strips of cloth. Sitting on the sofa next to Li Xiaolu was a man and a woman. The man was strong, had a short haircut, and was wearing a vest. He was sitting carelessly on the sofa. He crossed his arms over his chest, looked at Li Xiaolu, and said, this guy's parents must be big fish. If you can use her to catch a fish, if it's a pen, we probably won't have time to do it in our lifetime. The woman lit a cigarette and took a puff. She looked at the man and said calmly, of course it's good to make a fortune, but the background of the parents of a girl like her is definitely not simple. We have to do something about this. Just do it carefully. The man nodded slightly and said seriously, yes. Saw these two people? Chen Tao said, Search the data of these two people. After a while, Chen Tao got the data of these two guys. This man's name is Zhou Zijian. And this woman's name is Zhong Xiaoyan. Both of them were natives of Earth, and they seemed to kidnap Li Xiaolu just for time. Seeing these data, Chen Tao didn't understand even more. What's going on? Chen Tao frowned slightly. With the power of Li Xiaolu's third-generation gene body, it would be extremely difficult for these two people to capture Li Xiaolu. But why did Li Xiaolu let them take her away? Chen Tao frowned. In any case, no matter what the problem is, let's rescue Li Xiaolu first. In the picture, Zhou Zijian stood up, looked at Zhong Xiaoyan and said, "I'm going to the toilet, you keep an eye on her." When Zhong Xiaoyan heard this, she crossed her legs and said, "You don't even look at her like that. She is just a teenage girl. How can she run away when she is tied like that?" "That's good." Zhou Zijian raised his eyebrows slightly and walked to the toilet on his own. Suddenly, only Li Xiaolu and Zhong Xiaoyan were left in the living room. Zhong Xiaoyan glanced at Li Xiaolu and took a puff of her cigarette. Suddenly, Li Xiaolu's figure disappeared. Disappeared into thin air. Zhong Xiaoyan was stunned, and her eyes widened. She quickly rubbed her eyes with her hands and looked at the sofa again, but there was still no one on the sofa. Suddenly, Zhong Xiaoyan's face changed slightly, and he stood up quickly. "Zhou Zijian, come out quickly." She looked around, but she couldn't see Li Xiaolu. She looked very nervous and uneasy. "What did you do? What did you do?" Zhou Zijian's somewhat impatient voice came. Zhou Zijian walked out of the toilet while putting on his pants. He looked at Zhong Xiaoyan. Zhong Xiaoyan said, "Take a look." She pointed to the couch. When Zhou Zijian heard this, he looked over. "What's going on?" Zhou Zijian's face changed slightly. "Where are the people?" Zhong Xiaoyan also panicked. "I don't know either, she just disappeared out of thin air." "Bullshit. Disappeared out of thin air? What disappeared out of thin air? How could someone disappear out of thin air? Really, I don't even have to worry about going to the toilet," Zhou Zijian cursed. Other side. Fang Xueqing glanced at Zhou Zijian and Zhong Xiaoyan, who were in a mess on the screen, and her eyes fell to the side. Li Xiaolu was lying on the bed, and Chen Tao was pulling off the ropes and strips of cloth from her body. Li Xiaolu's vision returned and she saw Chen Tao. When she saw Chen Tao, Li Xiaolu's eyes lit up slightly. There was surprise in her eyes and she said, "Brother Chen Tao." Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly, smiled and said, "Are you okay?" Li Xiaolu slowly got up. She sat on the bedside, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "It's okay. They tied me up and didn't do anything." Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu and said, "Why don't you resist?" Li Xiaolu was startled and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao sat on the chair, looked at Li Xiaolu's clear eyes, and said, "I think they are just ordinary people. You only need to use your abilities and you can leave at will." But not only did you not leave, but you still acted like this. Hearing this, Li Xiaolu's eyes glowed. She looked at Chen Tao, pursed her lower lip, and said, "I think, our abilities should not be exposed in front of ordinary people. If we do that, I'm worried about the future. I can no longer live in school like an ordinary person. So, I didn't use those abilities." He looked at the girl in front of him with her head slightly lowered, as if she had done something wrong. Chen Tao was stunned. Chen Tao never expected that this would be the case. Indeed, Chen Tao has always been paying attention to himself, but rarely to Li Xiaolu. Li Xiaolu also has her own life. She hopes to go to school and live a normal life on Earth. So, for Li Xiaolu, on Earth, in front of other ordinary people, she will not choose to use power to avoid being treated as a non-human. Seeing this, Chen Tao touched the back of his head and said, "Sorry, I didn't take care of your feelings. What you did is not wrong. You don't have to bow your head. Li Xiaolu was slightly startled, she raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, however, I have used my genetic ability to teleport you here. In order to avoid those two people and to make them remember it, I will go to talk to them. Hearing this, Li Xiaolu's eyes were shining, she looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes and said, thank you, brother Chen Tao. Chen Tao nodded slightly, stood up, and looked at the picture. Looking at the two people in the picture who were in a mess and looking for Li Xiaolu. His eyebrows slightly relaxed, and his figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. Impossible, how could she run away when she was tied up like that? Zhou Zijian couldn't help but say it out loud when he didn't find Li Xiaolu. Zhou Zijian said impatiently, I said, she disappeared out of thin air for no reason. Bullshit. Zhou Zijian glanced at Zhong Xiaoyan, how could she disappear out of thin air? How could a person disappear out of thin air? Zhong Xiaoyan frowned and stopped talking after seeing it. No need to look for it. Suddenly a voice sounded. Hearing the voice of a third person appearing out of thin air in the room, Zhou Zijian and Zhong Xiaoyan couldn't help but look at the source of the sound together. At a glance, they saw a man standing next to them, with his hands around his chest, looking at the two of them. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 326. Who are you? Zhou Zijian was stunned when he saw Chen Tao. After he came to his senses, he frowned. Chen Tao crossed his arms, looked at Zhou Zijian, and said lightly, you kidnapped my people, but you don't even know who I am. Zhou Zijian was slightly startled, and he looked at Zhong Xiaoyan next to him. They looked at Chen Tao together. Zhou Zijian narrowed his eyes and said, I understand, that person is related to you, and then you hid her. Zhong Xiaoyan frowned, and she looked at Zhou Zijian. Zhong Xiaoyan told Zhou Zijian that she saw the person disappear out of thin air with her own eyes. It was not the man in front of her who hid her. But Zhong Xiaoyan knew that no matter what she said, Zhou Zijian would not believe it. Now that this man came out, Zhou Zijian directly thought that this man hid the woman. Zhong Xiaoyan knew that no matter what she said, it was useless, so she simply stopped talking. Zhong Xiaoyan looked at Chen Tao. Zhong Xiaoyan didn't see where Chen Tao came out just now. She subconsciously glanced at the door next to her, and the door was closed. Strange, Zhong Xiaoyan was confused. The door was obviously locked, and she didn't hear the sound of the door opening just now, so how did this man get in? Zhou Zijian stared at Chen Tao and said, where did you hide her? Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Zhou Zijian and said lightly, where she went, you don't need to know. No need to know. Zhou Zijian was stunned, he squinted at Chen Tao, you are so arrogant, you came here alone, took away my people, and dared to talk to me like this, you probably don't want to live. He took out a pistol from his waist and pointed the gun at Chen Tao. Zhou Zijian said, tell me, where did that person go? Facing the muzzle of the gun, Chen Tao looked at Zhou Zijian indifferently, his hands folded in front of his chest, and said nothing. Zhou Zijian's eyebrows suddenly frowned, looking for death. The finger on the trigger slightly closed, and the bullet was not fired. Puff, a sound of flesh and blood separated was heard. Zhou Zijian's wrist was broken into two pieces. The hand holding the pistol fell to the ground with a slight sound. Zhou Zijian was stunned for a moment, he couldn't even react, he came back to his senses and looked at his hand. At a glance, his pupils trembled slightly. Because he found that his hand had been broken into two pieces. Blood slowly flowed out. Zhou Zijian's pupils condensed slightly. At this moment, a sharp pain came from the wound. Ah! Almost uncontrollable, a scream came from Zhou Zijian's mouth. My hand, Zhou Zijian covered his hand in panic. He was so scared that he collapsed on the ground, holding the wound tightly with his hand, and shouted, "Save me, save me." Zhou Zijian hurriedly looked at Zhong Xiaoyan and said, "Xiaoyan, call a doctor quickly, call a doctor quickly. Save me, save me. I'm bleeding, a lot of blood, save me, I will die from excessive blood loss." Zhou Zijian's face was pale and his expression was extremely panicked. Zhong Xiaoyan's face also changed, her pupils trembled, and she looked at Chen Tao. The dark half-moon blade surrounded Chen Tao, and Chen Tao looked at Zhong Xiaoyan indifferently, his eyes were full of indifference. Meeting Chen Tao's sight, Zhong Xiaoyan's face was as pale as paper. "Zhong Xiaoyan, save me," Zhou Zijian panicked and held Zhong Xiaoyan's clothes with his hands. Facing death, Zhou Zijian had completely lost his mind. Zhong Xiaoyan slapped Zhou Zijian's hand with force, stepped aside, looked at Chen Tao in panic, and said, "Brother, brother, I was wrong. I know I was wrong." She hurriedly knelt down in front of Chen Tao. She looked at Chen Tao and begged, forgive me, please." Seeing Zhong Xiaoyan's reaction, Zhou Zijian's pupils trembled. He looked at Chen Tao, his face was as pale as paper, and he said in panic, "Brother, I know I was wrong, forgive me, forgive me." Zhou Zijian knelt down in front of Chen Tao, saying in horror. The two seemed to have realized the seriousness of the matter. Chen Tao waved his hand, and the half-moon blade swept past. Zhou Zijian's neck was broken. A head rolled to the ground. "Ah!" Zhong Xiaoyan screamed. Looking at Zhou Zijian's slowly falling body, Zhong Xiaoyan's face was pale. She looked at Chen Tao fiercely and said, "Brother, he was the one who came up with the idea of kidnapping people. I didn't bother to kidnap her at the beginning, really, and I was wrong, I was really wrong." Zhong Xiaoyan begged, kneeling on the ground, crying and begging Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Zhong Xiaoyan, his eyes were cold. The two kidnapped Li Xiaolu, who had the third-generation gene body, and the two could not hurt Li Xiaolu. But if the people they kidnapped were replaced with ordinary people, what would the consequences be? If the kidnapped people can't pay, won't the girl be killed? Thinking of this, Chen Tao's mood turned cold. Although at Chen Tao's current level, it is easy for him to wipe out a planet, and for a life, he wants to wipe it out, it is just a matter of thought. However, Chen Tao was born on Earth, he is kind by nature, so for him, he respects any life. Life is precious. If he can avoid killing, Chen Tao will not kill. But Chen Tao cannot forgive the bastard who touches the people around him. Chen Tao said calmly, "Stop arguing." After hearing the cold voice, Zhong Xiaoyan shut up and stopped crying. She just lowered her head. She looked timid. Looking at Zhong Xiaoyan's expression, Chen Tao said calmly, "Let me ask you a question, why did you target Li Xiaolu?" When Zhong Xiaoyan heard this, she raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, her eyes full of tears, with a glimmer of hope, she said, I say, can you not kill me?" Chen Tao said calmly, "You are not qualified to bargain with me." Zhong Xiaoyan was startled, she bit her lip, she said, "It was Zhou Zijian who found the target, I just helped him a little. However, I heard him say that he seemed to think that Li Xiaolu had a lot of time. She never considered buying some expensive things, and what she wore and used were very valuable things, and seeing that she always came out of a big villa, so I thought her family was very wealthy." She looked at Chen Tao nervously, "I was wrong, if I knew that the person was yours, I would not dare to kill me." Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "So that's the case, as compensation for answering my question, I will grant you a death without any pain." The woman's face changed slightly. Suddenly, Zhong Xiaoyan's body turned into dots of light and disappeared. She was directly decomposed by Chen Tao. After solving this matter, Chen Tao looked at the room, looked at the body on the ground, and his mind moved. The body also disappeared. From today on, these two people are equivalent to evaporating from the world and no longer exist. After solving this matter, Chen Tao disappeared on the spot. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 327. Through the picture suspended in the room. Li Xiaolu in the room took in the whole scene. Her eyes were shining. For a girl like Li Xiaolu, such a picture is bloody and cruel. But Li Xiaolu used the mirror given to her by Rose, and she had seen too many pictures of civilizations outside the earth. She had seen many bloody and cruel pictures, and for her, she was immune. It was just Chen Tao's indifference that made Li Xiaolu feel strange. Li Xiaolu knew very well that the reason why Chen Tao was so indifferent and cruel was because of her. Li Xiaolu had a strange feeling in her heart. Li Xiaolu had always had a strange feeling for Chen Tao. Li Xiaolu knew that Chen Tao treated her as a sister. But Li Xiaolu was very clear that she had no blood relationship with Chen Tao at all, and she was not his sister at all. It was just that Chen Tao was too good to her. Girls yearn for the strong, and Li Xiaolu was no exception. Li Xiaolu saw Chen Tao's strength and gentleness. Her heart had long been set on Chen Tao. But there were too many girls around Chen Tao, and Li Xiaolu hoped that the person she liked would only have her in his eyes. Therefore, although Li Xiaolu had a good impression of Chen Tao, she did not show it. Although her heart was inclined towards Chen Tao, there were too many girls around Chen Tao. This led to Li Xiaolu tacitly accepting the brother-sister relationship between Chen Tao and her. But now, seeing Chen Tao getting angry for her, Li Xiaolu's heartbeat slightly accelerated. Brother Chen Tao. Chen Tao's figure appeared in the bedroom. His eyes fell on Li Xiaolu. Fang Shueqing saw this. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Then, husband, I'll go out first." Chen Tao nodded slightly. Fang Shueqing turned around and walked away. As soon as Fang Shueqing left, only Chen Tao and Li Xiaolu were left in the room. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu, and Li Xiaolu moved her body, as if she was going to get off the bed. Chen Tao said, "Just sit down." He sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Li Xiaolu in front of him. Li Xiaolu is slender, and she wears a thin white dress that fits her slender figure. A head of long hair like ink falls naturally on Li Xiaolu's shoulders. She has a delicate face, and her skin is white as cream, very beautiful. Although her bust is not as amazing as Ziking's, the slightly bulging clothes are graceful. Li Xiaolu is more like a girl's unique cuteness. In Chen Tao's eyes, Li Xiaolu is like his sister. After all, Chen Tao killed Li Xiaolu's father for his own business. Her father is guilty, but she is innocent. For Li Xiaolu, Chen Tao still cares about her. It's just that he has been busy recently, so he didn't pay much attention to her. Chen Tao said, "Have you gotten used to living in base number 1 recently?" When Li Xiaolu heard this, her eyes sparkled, and she said, "Well, the sisters are all very nice to me, especially Sister He Yuxuan, who is very nice to me." Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly, and said, "I don't know when it started, but my life here is different from that of ordinary people. If you are not used to this kind of life, you can live in Yuehu Manor, where it will be more comfortable and free." Li Xiaolu looked at Chen Tao and said, "In fact, there is not much difference between being in base number 1 and being down there. I don't care that much, it's okay." Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly, and said, "In the future, if you encounter anything down there, you can tell me directly, and I can help you." Li Xiaolu's eyes sparkled, she looked at Chen Tao, and hummed softly. Chen Tao stood up slightly, smiled and said, "Are you hungry? Let's go have lunch together." Yeah, Li Xiaolu had a smile on her face. Chen Tao took Li Xiaolu out the door. Came to the dining room. One look. Chen Tao was slightly startled. In the dining room, Betty was sitting at the dining table, with a stack of plates in front of her. Betty was slowly cutting the steak in front of her with a knife and fork, but her little mouth was full of grease. It can be seen that Betty had eaten a lot. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao smiled. Betty raised her face slightly, she glanced at Chen Tao with her big ruby eyes, then retracted her gaze and put a piece of beef into her little mouth with a knife and fork. Looking at Betty's cute appearance, Chen Tao smiled, and he looked at Li Xiaolu beside him. Li Xiaolu frowned slightly, and her expression seemed a little unnatural. Li Xiaolu thought she could have a meal with Chen Tao, but she didn't expect there was a third person. "Xiaolu, what's wrong?" Li Xiaolu was startled, then she came to her senses, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Nothing, nothing." Chen Tao smiled and said, "Sit down, tell number one what you like to eat." Li Xiaolu hummed. Chen Tao and Li Xiaolu sat down one after another. Betty ate by herself as if she didn't see them. Chen Tao looked at Betty, picked up the napkin, stretched it out, and wiped Betty's mouth. Betty was slightly startled, and she said, "What are you doing?" She twisted her body, frowned cutely, and seemed a little resistant. Looking at Betty's expression, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Is it so delicious? Can you give me some?" Betty rolled her eyes at Chen Tao and said, "No, if you want to eat, ask number one to cook it yourself." Betty liked steak so much that she would not agree to share it with Chen Tao even if it was him. However, she had been eating it for half a year and was not tired of it, which was something Chen Tao did not expect. Chen Tao raised his hand. "What are you doing?" "Stop making trouble," Betty struggled. But Chen Tao didn't care, he picked Betty up and put her in his arms. He closed his hands and hugged her in his arms, leaning close to her hair and smelling her hair fragrance. "Stop making trouble, don't get so close." Betty's face flushed, and she twisted her body symbolically. Chen Tao smiled, couldn't help but kiss her cheek, and said with a smile, "Take a bite, just a bite." Betty's eyes were shining, she pursed her thin lips, she picked up a piece of beef with a knife and fork, she put the beef to Chen Tao's mouth and said, "Just one piece." Chen Tao smiled, "Okay, one piece." He opened his mouth. He ate a piece. He looked at Betty and smiled. For Betty, the steak on her plate was her favorite thing. She would never give the steak to someone else. But Chen Tao hugged her, coaxed her, and asked her to do it. So cute. Betty put her knife and fork back, looked at Chen Tao with her charming eyes, then retracted her gaze, not looking at Chen Tao, but her fair cheeks were red. "Shat!" There was a voice. Chen Tao was slightly startled, and he raised his face to look at Li Xiaolu. Li Xiaolu said, "I'm full, I'll go back first." After saying this, she turned and left. Seeing this, Chen Tao was stunned. "Full?" Chen Tao looked at the steak in front of Li Xiaolu, which was intact. She didn't eat it at all. What was going on? My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 328. Is she sick? A voice came from beside her. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said, "This is unlikely. I have helped her upgrade her genetic body. Now she has a third-level genetic body. There is no possibility of getting sick." Betty said, "That's a little strange. You don't even eat steak when you're not sick." Chen Tao thought for a moment, put Betty on the chair, and said, "I'll go take a look." Li Xiaolu hummed. Chen Tao left the dining hall and came to the door of Li Xiaolu's bedroom. He raised his hand and knocked on the door. Who? Li Xiaolu, who was inside the house, heard a knock on the door and asked. Chen Tao said softly, "It's me, your brother Chen Tao. Are you sick? Why did you go back to the house without eating a few bites?" "I'm fine," Li Xiaolu said, "I just have no appetite and want to sleep." "Is it because of this incident that I was frightened and lost my appetite?" Chen Tao touched the back of his head and couldn't figure it out, but it probably wasn't a physical problem. For a while, Chen Tao didn't know how to solve it. Chen Tao said, "Okay, let's get some more rest. If you are hungry, ask number 1 to deliver food." There was no sound in the house. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze, turned and left. Inside the house, Li Xiaolu was lying on her side on the bed. She pursed her thin lips and said, "Brother Chen Tao, you are such a big piece of wood." If Chen Tao heard what Li Xiaolu said, Chen Tao would definitely say that he was wronged. He didn't do anything, why did he become a piece of wood? Now that he knew that Li Xiaolu was a little tired, Chen Tao planned to let Li Xiaolu take a good rest. Chen Tao didn't bother him and went back to the dining hall on his own. In the dining hall, Betty was still eating. Seeing this, Chen Tao stepped forward and was about to go in to accompany her. "Dear," suddenly, a voice sounded. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's heart skipped a beat, and he turned his face to look sideways. "There is a woman standing over there." It was Rose. Rose was wearing thin clothes. She looked at Chen Tao with a smile on her beautiful face. She approached Chen Tao and snuggled into Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao was startled, then he smiled, raised his hand, hugged her gently, held her shoulder, comforted her gently, and said, "What's wrong?" Rose raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, her eyes glowed, and said with a smile, "Did you notice Li Xiaolu's matter?" Hearing this, Chen Tao was slightly startled. He looked at Rose and said, "What?" Rose's eyes glowed, and she smiled, "Haven't you noticed yet?" Chen Tao blinked. Rose pursed her thin lips charmingly and said with a smile, "She is in love with you." Chen Tao was startled, then he smiled bitterly, "Don't talk nonsense, she doesn't hate me, actually I'm thankful to God." He said, "Li Xiaolu's father died in my hands. To her, I am her father-killing enemy. I am grateful that she does not hate me." Rose looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "If she didn't love you, why would she be so angry when she saw you and Betty making out?" Chen Tao was startled and said, "You peeked at me again." Rose seems to always like to peek into Chen Tao's life, which is not good. Rose smiled and said, "Of course," I said, "you are everything to me, of course I have to take your affairs to heart. You are happy, that is what I want to see most, I don't want to see you are upset." Chen Tao smiled bitterly, raised his hand, tapped the bridge of Rose's nose, and said, "You are the only one who is naughty. Then you say she likes me." Rose smiled and said, "Well, of course I have to pay attention to the sisters who live in base number 1. Li Xiaolu, I have been observing for a long time, and she has indeed fallen in love with you. After knowing this, what are you going to do? How to do it?" Chen Tao smiled bitterly and said, "How else can we do this?" Chen Tao looked at Rose and said, "It's enough for me to have you now, Li Xiaolu. I just want to treat her as my sister and take care of her, that's all." Rose looked at Chen Tao and said, "Li Xiaolu, isn't she beautiful? I feel that although her figure is not as good as mine, she is still pretty. I can still accept her being my sister." Chen Tao said with a smile, "Of course she is beautiful. Li Xiaolu is a beauty. In a year or two, she will be a great beauty. Then why not?" Rose looked at Chen Tao with gleaming eyelashes. Chen Tao approached Rose, kissed her forehead, and said, "I am from Earth. I am different from you. You may not care how many sisters I have, but I have to be responsible for you." Rose's eyes glowed with a hint of luster. She raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said with a smile, "My dear, come here." She raised her hand, took Chen Tao's hand, and led Chen Tao towards the bedroom. Looking at Rose's actions, Chen Tao naturally knew what Rose wanted to do, and he smiled. Entering Rose's bedroom, Chen Tao held Rose in his arms and walked to the bed. Rose in her arms showed a charming smile to Chen Tao, her big eyes were filled with moisture, and she looked very charming. Rose's bedroom door was closed by an unknown force. 3 hours later. Rose was lying on the pillow, looking at the face so close in front of her, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, revealing a charming smile. There was a glimmer of light in those eyes. 2 days of peaceful life passed like this. On the third day, it was early morning. "Husband," an anxious voice came, waking up Chen Tao from his sleep. "Hear this sound." Chen Tao opened his eyes, turned his head and looked. He found that He Yuxuan was standing beside Chen Tao's bed with an anxious look on her face. She looked at Chen Tao uneasily. Chen Tao sat up slowly, looked at He Yuxuan, and said, "What's wrong?" He Yuxuan pursed her lips and said, "Something happened. Xiaolu is missing." "Missing?" Chen Tao was startled, and he frowned suddenly and said, "What happened?" He Yuxuan said, "Xiaolu went to school yesterday, but she didn't come back at night. At that time, I thought she was out with her friends, so I didn't care. As a result, I found that she still didn't come back this morning. I tried to contact Xiaolu through the gene channel, but Xiaolu didn't respond." He Yuxuan looked serious and solemn. "Xiaolu is a third-generation gene body. There are not many people in our universe who can limit her gene communication ability. What's going on?" Chen Tao got up and got off the bed. He said to Xingyuan, "Xingyuan, search for Li Xiaolu's data." "Received the order, searching." Xingyuan's voice sounded slowly. Search completed, no data of Li Xiaolu was found. Upon hearing this, Chen Tao was shocked, and his face changed completely. "No. Xingyuan is this universe, even in other universes, it is an absolutely powerful existence. Using its search ability, if the data of that human cannot be found in this universe, there is only one possibility. Dead, the target is dead. No. This is impossible." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 329. Xingyuan can't find any data, which means that Li Xiaolu has been analyzed. No, this is impossible and shouldn't be. No matter how he thinks, Chen Tao can't figure out what's going on. Those who can analyze Li Xiaolu must be higher than the third-generation genome. If it were in the previous timeline, Chen Tao would think that it was most likely done by the fifth universe. But now Chen Tao has no conflicts with the fifth universe. Chen Tao can't figure out why someone would attack someone around him, and they attacked Li Xiaolu, the most inconspicuous person around Chen Tao. Very strange. Chen Tao frowned and said, "Xingyuan, detect the existence of the third-generation genome in the known universe, and then list the names of all the existences above the third-generation genome in the known universe." Received the command, searching. Search completed, writing completed. A blue screen appeared in front of Chen Tao. Through this screen, Chen Tao can see the names of all the existences above the third-generation genome. There are very few people in this universe who can surpass the third-generation gene body. If they are from the outer universe, they will definitely appear on the list in front of them. Chen Tao glanced at it and frowned. He stood up and said, "Xingyuan, are you sure that's all?" "This is based on the search results." Xingyuan's mechanical voice came. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao slowly sat on the edge of the bed, his eyebrows furrowed. "Dear, what's wrong?" He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao's expression and couldn't help asking. Chen Tao adjusted his mood slightly. He looked at He Yuxuan and said, "It's okay." He stood up and said, "I will solve this matter." He touched He Yuxuan's hair. Although Chen Tao has no clue now, Chen Tao knows very well that He Yuxuan is Li Xiaolu's best friend here. If He Yuxuan knew that Li Xiaolu was analyzed by the enemy, it would definitely be a big blow to He Yuxuan. In order to investigate the situation clearly, Chen Tao did not want to tell He Yuxuan about this matter. He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao, smiled and said, "Yeah. Chen Tao disappeared from the spot. He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao's disappearing back, and there was a trace of worry in her eyes. He Yuxuan was so smart that Chen Tao's expression just now made He Yuxuan know that something was wrong. It was just that He Yuxuan didn't want Chen Tao to worry, so she pretended not to know. He Yuxuan bit her lip and said, "I hope Xiaolu is okay." Chen Tao's figure appeared in the air, with a pair of pure white wings spread out behind him, flying in the air. Chen Tao fell into deep thought. I know everyone in the searched list, and there are no different names. But, this is impossible. Only people from the outer universe can attack Xiaolu. Those who can analyze Xiaolu at the same time are at least 4 generations of genes and strong people with astronomical computers. But the problem is that there is no name I don't know in this list. It's so strange. What's going on? Brother Chen Tao. Suddenly, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's gene channel. This familiar voice made Chen Tao tremble slightly. Xiaolu, Chen Tao said, where are you? What happened? Li Xiaolu is still alive? Li Xiaolu said, I don't know. When I got out of school yesterday, I was going to go back to base number 1, but halfway, I suddenly lost consciousness. I didn't wake up until just now. Her voice was a little uneasy and trembling. It's so strange. I can't use other genetic abilities except genetic communication ability, and it's pitch black around here. Where am I? Li Xiaolu's voice was confused. Chen Tao felt a little confused. She is still alive, indeed still alive, but why? Why can't the nebula detect her existence? Is this possible? Why does this happen? Chen Tao said, Xingyuan, can you track Xiaolu's location through the voice data information sent by Xingyuan? Received the command, tracking, unable to track. Chen Tao was stunned and said, why? She used the genetic communication function to talk to me, but she couldn't track me. The tracking function was interfered by another force. Xingyuan's mechanical voice was slow but emotionless. The other party has more powerful technology than Xingyuan, which limits Xingyuan's tracking ability. Hearing Xingyuan's words, Chen Tao felt a bang in his head. It felt like being struck by lightning, and Chen Tao was stunned. A celestial computer more powerful than Xingyuan. How is it possible? Does this thing exist in this world? Chen Tao frowned. No matter how much Chen Tao couldn't believe it, the facts were in front of Chen Tao. Xingyuan would not lie. Since Xingyuan said so, then this is the fact. At this moment, Chen Tao also figured out why Li Xiaolu was still alive, but Xingyuan couldn't find her data. Obviously, the other party used the power of the astronomical computer to block Li Xiaolu's data. Chen Tao suppressed his inner anxiety and said to Li Xiaolu in a gentle voice, don't be afraid, I will save you. There is no other way. Chen Tao rarely has no confidence, but now Chen Tao has no confidence at all. The enemy has not appeared yet, but Chen Tao already knows that the enemy has technology that is more powerful than Xingyuan's technology. Facing such an enemy, Chen Tao is now not sure at all. His greatest reliance, Xingyuan, can't be used. Then, what to do? Well, Li Xiaolu said softly, and responded. With Chen Tao's words, she seemed to be more at ease. He, do you really think you can save her? A neutral voice that can't distinguish gender sounded in the gene channel. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's heart condensed. His eyebrows frowned suddenly. Who are you? Why did you attack her? Who I am is not important, the neutral voice sounded again, saying, the important thing is that this woman's life is in my hands now. I want her to die, and she will die at any time. And you can only watch me kill her. The voice was indifferent. Chen Tao clenched his hands and said, what do you want to do? The technology this man possesses is more powerful than Chen Tao. In the known universe, or even in the entire universe, it is estimated that no one can be the opponent of the owner of this voice. Chen Tao has no choice. No matter what, he must first find out the situation. Chen Tao needs to know why this person wants to kill Li Xiaolu, and then think of a countermeasure. Frontally, Chen Tao does not think that he is the opponent of the other party, so he can only outsmart him, but, this makes Chen Tao very embarrassed. He knows very well that using his brain is not his strong point. He can only take one step at a time. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 330. Chen Tao suddenly saw that the air in front of him trembled slightly, and a dark wormhole appeared in front of him. This wormhole was not opened by Chen Tao. At this time, a voice sounded from the side. Through this wormhole, you can reach the girl. Don't you want to save her? Then come in. Chen Tao looked at the miniature wormhole in front of him. Trap? Is this a trap that person used against himself, using Xiaolu as bait to lure Chen Tao over? Brother Chen Tao, don't listen to her, don't go in, it's a trap. Li Xiaolu's voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Li Xiaolu seemed to have heard what the man said, and she also guessed that it was a trap. Chen Tao frowned slightly. Li Xiaolu said, Brother Chen Tao, leave it alone, you can go, I will be fine. Everything will be fine? Chen Tao closed his eyes. He slowly opened his eyes and stepped into the miniature wormhole. Chen Tao felt his eyes go dark. Slowly, his vision recovered. Chen Tao found that all around him was black. Directly in front of the darkness was Li Xiaolu. Li Xiaolu was wrapped in a transparent sphere and she seemed unable to move. Seeing Chen Tao, Li Xiaolu's eyes filled with moisture. Brother Chen Tao. She had obviously told Chen Tao not to come over, but she didn't expect that Chen Tao still came over. Haha, I didn't expect you to actually come here. The neutral voice sounded, not bad, but in this case, you will be my prey. As soon as he stepped into this space, Chen Tao already felt something was wrong. He could find that the gene function in his body was turned off. He cannot use genetic functions. At the same time, he couldn't feel the presence of Nebula. Obviously, he couldn't contact Nebula either. Chen Tao had used this method on Betty before, but Chen Tao never thought that one day, someone would use the same method on himself. Do you feel that the gene function cannot be used? Is it impossible to contact the celestial computer behind you? The neutral voice was slow and casual. Hearing this, Chen Tao frowned slightly, looked around, and said, I am just an ordinary person with a 6th-generation genetic body now. Faced with me like this, you should be able to come out, right? Haha, I'm not interested in meeting you. Rather than meeting you, I prefer to sit on a chair and watch you in pain. The neutral voice was casual. Frankly speaking, the technology you have is indeed it's quite powerful. If you don't take the initiative to enter the space I built, I won't be able to turn off your genetic function, but now he. Chen Tao frowned. Is it a trap? It's indeed a trap. Brother Chen Tao, why did you come in? Li Xiaolu looked at Chen Tao through the transparent sphere, her eyes filled with moisture. I am just an ordinary girl, a girl like me in this Earth star, you can find it casually. If I die, it will not affect the Earth and the world, but if you die, there will be chaos on the Earth and the entire universe. Li Xiaolu said, you shouldn't do such a thing for me. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu's tearful eyes and said lightly, life cannot be measured by status. For you, maybe you just need one of the ordinary Earth star girls. One, very ordinary, but to me, you are special. Among the hundreds of millions of girls in the entire Earth star, there is only one you. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu and said, if I know that something is going to happen to you, but I still remain indifferent or even abandon you, then I will no longer be me. Li Xiaolu was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao, her eyes glowing with a strange luster. Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu and breathed a sigh of relief. He looked around and said, it's okay if you don't come out. Now I've stepped into your trap. What do you want to do? Kill me? Haha, no, No, no. I'll kill you, how boring it is, the voice said playfully. Actually, I don't have any grudges against you. It's not impossible for me to let you go. Upon hearing this, Chen Tao's heart moved. Chen Tao said, can you let us go? Of course, as long as you do as I say, I will let you go. The neutral voice was full of amusement. Chen Tao frowned. I don't know where this guy came from. Logically speaking, there is no such terrifying and powerful existence in the entire universe. However, what Chen Tao can be sure of is that, indeed, Chen Tao has not offended such a being. It is estimated that this guy was just attracted by Chen Tao's 6th generation gene body, so he wanted to come and have a look. If she really didn't have any murderous intention towards Chen Tao and Li Xiaolu, maybe it would be safe. At present, it seems that this is the only way. Chen Tao said, what do you want me to do? Simple, I've been very bored recently and want to see something interesting. The voice was very slow. Interesting thing? This request made Chen Tao a little confused. What's so interesting? Chen Tao said, I don't know what you mean. Well, let's do this. The voice sounded again. Chen Tao suddenly saw the transparent ball surrounding Li Xiaolu dissipate. Li Xiaolu slowly landed and stood firm. She was startled for a moment, looked around, and then trotted towards Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu. Li Xiaolu wore a black gauze dress with off-shoulder design, with thin collarbons and a long neck. The gauze dress fit her tall and slender figure, fitting her charming figure. She held her waist, and the skirt was very short, and below was a pair of slender and straight legs, wrapped in black stockings, with high-heeled round boots on her feet. She had a delicate face, and under her long eyelashes were big eyes. She looked at Chen Tao with moving eyes and said, Chen Tao. Hearing this, Chen Tao raised his hand, gently held her little hand, looked at her gently, and said, are you okay? Li Xiaolu was slightly startled, and saw that Chen Tao looked like an older brother. Li Xiaolu's eyes were shining, she pursed her lips and said, I'm fine. Haha, don't worry, I didn't hurt her. Hearing this, Chen Tao raised his head, looked up, and said, what do you want us to do? It's very simple, you kiss her and I'll let you go. That faint voice sounded. Hearing this request, Chen Tao was stunned. What is this request? Chen Tao frowned and said, just like that. Just like that, otherwise, what do you think I want? The neutral voice revealed a hint of playfulness. Chen Tao frowned even deeper. Will things really be so simple? Just like that?